to find this slide so let me make sure I've got this. Can you all see that there? Okay, great. I'll explain why I call it the human stack in a minute, but what I found was that we needed to rethink technology from the ground up, and we needed to rethink the way that we introduce humans to technology. So that's really what I'm going to talk about today, is a lot around how humans interact with technology, not just how technology interacts with itself, which is most of what I could find and what I studied. I want to focus specifically on the anatomy of emotions and experience and expectations as they play out in implementations. Okay, so that's the topic. Here's a little bit about me. My name's Tim Lockie. I live in Bozeman, Montana. My current hobby is an off-grid property that I am working on. I just got solar hooked up on it, so it's really fun. I got my start in Salesforce on when I took over a 450 user build that went 13 months over budget or over time and 150,000 over budget. And I was that terrible client that you never want to have, that knows too much and asks too many questions. And asked so many questions, I eventually just started a business called Now It Matters. So some of the slides that you'll see are part Now It Matters. I'm just launching the Human Stack now, so you'll see some crossover. I would love to connect with you on LinkedIn. So if you want to find me on LinkedIn, and the website is the Human Stack, you could go there and you could sign up for a future release, because by the end of next month, we should be launching it. What I want to cover is the mindset here and the tools that go in that mindset. So what I discovered is that the most important part of helping humans rethink technology is the mindset, because it's thinking. And so I have now accumulated all of these different tools that I use in my mindset. And I'm just going to talk through some of those tools. What would help me out is to find, for you to say which is helpful or interesting. You can do that in the chat. And if you've got a question, just throw the question in there. I think that'll be really helpful. We're going to talk about first theory of change. I'm going to talk about binaries. We'll discuss why emotions are important. We're going to think about digital maturity. I'll relate it all to cars and drivers, and then we'll talk about the whole stack. So that's a loose agenda. When you're working with nonprofits, they all have a theory of change, which says, there's a problem in the world, we want to make it better. And so as I started to think about what is the problem, how do we make it better, the thing that stood out to me is that when it comes to information systems, people are not clear. Humans are not clear about what they're trying to do with it. What's really clear is that you want to use it to collect data. Like, that part everybody gets. But then after that, it gets a little bit fuzzy. And I think part of the reason that it gets fuzzy is we're not clear about who does what. And we also think systems are just technology. And the reality is that that systems are part technology, mostly digital, but they're half digital and they're half human. And the humans get left out almost all the time. And then when I was thinking about, okay, what process does an organization need to go through in order to start using data in a way that will create informed decisions, I started thinking about, okay, the lowest unit of meaning is a datum. And datum plural is data. I don't know if you know that. I've learned that like 19 times and I always forget it. So we should say things like the data are, but I never do, because then you sound like a total nerd. So, but data is plural for datum. Datum is a unit of meaning. So if you have like 7, the number 7 in an Excel spreadsheet, box, cell, whatever, that is a datum. And if you have, a bunch of them, that's data, okay? But data by itself does not actually do anything. And so when you apply context to it or give it labels, then it becomes information. So if you've got 7 and at the top, there's a cell that says, day of birth, and okay, they were born on March 7th, then that becomes information, okay? And information is usable, data is not really that usable. Information, though, is only as usable as the data is accurate. And so one of the main reasons that nonprofit organizations do not use their data to make decisions is because they're smart enough not to, because they know how crazy their data is. And so it doesn't make sense for them to use their data to make decisions. They would be better off to use instinct to make decisions. And so the goal of the goal of systems is to increase the amount of insight that is coming through this pipeline rather than instinct. And executives have really, really well-defined instinct they've accumulated over time. And so the data actually has to be very accurate. The information has to perform highly in order for it to make sense for an executive to make decisions based on this pipeline rather than their own instinct. I just want to pause right there and find out, is that your experience as well? You can put that in the sidebar. You could raise your hand. Curious if that matches your experience in life. Great, thanks, Alessia. Great. All right. I've put labels on this of staff, directors, and executives, and that is not to say that staff do not have insight or use insight. But when it comes to where in the system staff do the most work, usually staff are the ones that enter the most data just because of their jobs. When they're doing their jobs, they're collecting data and it goes in the system. And there's more staff than directors or executives, so it makes sense. That's where a lot of the data comes from. In a well-defined system, directors use information to manage their staff and see what their staff are doing. And directors turn that information into insight level dashboards that executives can look at. So one way to think about this is data is a record, information is a report, insight is a dashboard. If you're translating it to Salesforce, that's a simple way of thinking about it. Okay, so that's the theory of change. This is the North Star that you have to establish when you're working with an organization and when you're working with humans in technology, because you have to say, what is it that we are trying to accomplish with this? Because if it's just storing data, great, we're done. But if it's actually creating insight level decisions, then you have to do other amounts of work. Okay, there's that
and
part
there
of
is
the
a quick
toolbox.
question from Ruby in the chat.
Yes, absolutely it does. Great question. As always, Ruby. Ruby and I are old friends here, so it's really good to see Ruby on the call here. Yes, absolutely. And the way that I would say that, and I sometimes wonder about arranging it this way, is that you could say it at insight and data meet in information. In other words, you pass down your insight, needs to information, and you pass up the data to meet those needs. So they meet in information. That's one way of looking at it. So yeah, great question. The other thing that I would say there is it is almost never efficient to grab those strategy levels at the outset. This is very different than when I used to do implementations, and I'll talk through why at the end. But a lot of data needs are known at the outset, and I would say start with those and train your executives to think about what data they need, train your directors to know how to get that data, and then train your system, your data collection, and your staff to collect that kind of data. But think of it as iterative. So great question. Okay, base codes and binaries. The really interesting thing about technology, digital especially, and I cannot get my head around this, even though I know it to be true. Every pixel that we see on our screen, every keystroke that we take boils down to a yes, no, like huge nested, true false statement that boils down to a true or false at the end. It's all a binary, the zeros and ones. all of it, every pixel color, everything. It's just so amazing to me. But at the end of the day, the tech stack runs on true false statements that create accuracy or not. And I started thinking about this because I studied architecture. And one of the things I loved about architecture is that you had to contend with gravity. There's always this up-down binary. Like, you can't just stick a wall someplace or cantilever a floor out and expect it to stay up because gravity is working against it all the time. So there's always a force that you have to deal with that creates a constraint that you have to design within. In the tech stack, that is accuracy or true false. And it's really important to understand whenever you're working digital, you have to think, is this true, false, or you end up in an infinite loop, right? Humans do not operate the same way. The base code of humans is in or out. Do I belong or not? I joined this call and I immediately wonder if you all are going to like me or not. That is the way humans are. We're just designed that way to wonder, do we belong to this group? We are herd animals. That's not a misdesign. That's the way that we are. And we need each other. And so our core questions are in or out. That is not a problem at all. That is just like, the tech stack. If you know what binary and what constraint you're working within, then you can design for that. If you are, though, thinking that humans are like a tech stack, and all you need to do is provide accurate information to them, and they will know what to do next, we are wildly mistaken on how humans function. We have to start thinking about, on the human stack, when we're working with humans, we have to start thinking, does this person feel like they're included or not? Do they belong here or not? I threw on LinkedIn the other day, I threw a question around invisible work, and I had so many admins reaching out about the work that they have that it feels invisible to their organization. Being invisible feels like you are out, you are not belonging in an organization. And that is a critical thing to understand about humans and around technology. Okay, so that's the next tool in the toolbox. We need to understand the base code of the humans is in or out, and the design constraint is belonging. All right, the next tool that I want to talk through is, well, before I move on, are there any concerns, questions, thoughts around that? Again, please use the chat function or throw a big thumbs up, thumbs down, or a big question mark if you're like, that makes no sense. I don't even know what a binary is or whatever. All right, cool. Thank you. I see the fire. I love it. Okay, cool. All right, so I had a friend that went to Disneyland. This is about how emotions work. I had a friend that went to Disneyland, and if you think about his trip in terms of an emotional map, here's kind of what happened. So there's things that happen that are good and things that happen that are bad. And, emotions are really bulky. They don't really distinguish more than, positive or negative. So it's just kind of that way. And when I asked him, hey, how was it? He said, it was great. So that means that the circle with the plus sign means, all right, it was a good experience. And what he meant by it was great, it was good, whatever, what he meant by that was that he accumulated a number of things that happened throughout that experience, but not all of them were positive. So for example, when he first showed up, he had to go find parking, and that was like an asphalt terror. The parking lots are so large, and you'd love to just get there and, avoid the gate and everything, but you can't. And so we had to park, go through the gate, but then they got in line, to go to, I don't even remember what's at Disneyland anymore. If anybody knows, you could help me out in the chat bar. That's great. But they went and got in line at like Space Mountain. Is that Disneyland? I think so. Okay. Got in line for the roller coaster. They're very, very happy about that. So they're all really happy. All right. But then while they were waiting in line, this guy realized how much of his day was going to be spent waiting in line, not on rides or anything else. And that was not positive. He was not happy with that emotion. But then they went on the ride, and it was great. but also while they were in line, they lost their camera or their phone. So that wasn't great. That was actually not happy. And then they went and got lunch. So lunch was good. And then they got in line. And by now he was like, okay, lines are lines. It's not great, but it's not the end of the world. They found ways to like play games on their phones and talk and stuff. And then, then they went to another place and it was good. And then they went someplace else and it was bad. You kind of get the idea. And then they ended, though, the last thing of the day was that this guy's daughter really wanted to meet Jasmine, the princess, and they did. And Jasmine was amazing. They got an autograph. And so, and that's important because of something called peak end theory. Peak end theory is that just states that you remember the peaks and the end the most. So when he says it was great, he's thinking he's taking all of these emotions and these experiences and he's aggregating those. So your emotions are a sum of your experience. Okay, so that's kind of first blush. That's kind of how emotions work. When you say something's good or bad, you have all of these little sub events that happen inside of an experience, right? Okay. That slide is completely in the wrong spot. It was supposed to be in front of that one. So there we go. All right. But that's actually not how emotions really work. That's how we think that they work. But what really happens is that there's a multiplier that we put in there. I'm not sure if it's a multiplier now that I'm thinking about that. I don't know what it is. Anyway, if we have an expectation that something's going to be bad, so he knew that there was going to be some bad parking before he showed up. So he was expecting the parking to be really bad, right? But then miraculously, in lot C instead of in lot X, they found a spot because someone had just pulled out. And so the experience was actually bad, but not as bad as being in lot X would have been. And so the experience was better than the expectation. So there's this gap right here, right? In what you expected and what actually happened. And that gap gets added to the experience, creating not enough good emotion to go into the good line, but way better than the expectation that was going to happen. Okay. All right. And the same thing can happen when you're thinking about a good experience. So you expect something to be really great. He, when he was a kid, he went to Space Mountain. It was amazing. Couldn't wait to go back. But then the experience was like, okay, it's like the snowman wasn't quite as scary as he remembered, and it wasn't as high, and it went pretty fast, and his kids didn't love it because they wanted to go to the Star Wars stuff instead of the old school stuff. All right, so it was still good, but not as good, right? So does this make sense? This is how emotions really happen. What you do is you have an experience, you relate it to the expectation, and the gap between those two forms your final emotion related to that experience. And so these are what you blend together to say, was something good or bad? Okay. I really want to know, like, thumbs up, thumbs down, agree, disagree. This is content that I feel like is critical to understand as technologists. Thumbs up from Alessia, thank you. Thumbs up from Kaivia. Did I say your name right? I think I did not at all. Very sorry if I didn't. Ruby, yes, thank you. Oh, thank you, Jana. Yeah, I did. We lost our camera and one of our not our kids, but I was a kid when we went there and lost our camera, and it was like terrible. Remember those cameras that had the discs on them? We lost that. Anyway, okay, all right, I'm done. These were not like CD discs. These were like film discs. I don't even understand those. Okay, all right. Okay, so this then is how expectations affect your experience if you're going to Disneyland. All right, so parking wasn't as bad. We already covered that. Space Mountain wasn't as good. Already covered that. And then, lunch was pretty much, or the line was pretty much what they expected, not too much worse. And then, they did these other things. And so my point on all of this is it's not actually the orange experiences. It's the circles here, the blue circles are actually what gets measured. Okay. And at the end, then the peak, the last thing that you remember, that's the thing that stands out the most. So yes, you are exactly right. perfect. Low expectations are key, right? Low expectations are key if you are going to regulate emotions, if you're going to look at emotions carefully, either keeping expectations low or realistic. But the one thing you don't want to do is blow expectations really high, right? So when we talk about customer experience, I think we should be talking about customer expectation. Actually start forming customer expectation way more than we should be focused on customer experience. It is, yes, overpromise and underdeliver. Yep, that's part of it. And so, yeah, all of that. You guys are like such good students. You're already skipping ahead. All right, what's this got to do with tech? All right, so if this is the happiest place on earth, if Disneyland is the happiest place on earth, I was thinking, what is the exact opposite of the happiest place on earth? And it is a CRM implementation, right? Like you don't even get good or bad, you get bad or worse. Like that, that's the expectation range right there, right? That's what we're working with. We need to just start by understanding like people already know this is going to be bad. And so, I want you for just a few minutes to just think through what does the emotional map on a CRM implementation look like? What are the, and please type them in. Yes, data migration, absolutely, right? Like they think it's going to be bad and then it's 10x worse, and that like lowers it. So you're already in bad and then you get lower. I literally have heard multiple times, if I ever have to do a CRM implementation and migrate data again, I will quit this job. Like that's
I have to speak in instead of typing. So this emotional map is when the AE sells the Salesforce system to your client, saying that this would not only do everything but also give you a massage and like lull you to sleep, and then you come in and
right. Oh yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. Yes, you're the partner that has to live up to expectations that your company didn't make.
Yes.
Yes, correct. All right. Yeah, absolutely.
Hey Tim.
Yes. Yes.
Yay, my sound. You can hear me, right?
I can. Yeah. Yeah.
All right. I was wondering where friction comes into play for the tech user adoption, because what I'm noticing is that the more difficult you make it for somebody to do the thing, that like that call to action, then that's usually where behavior drops in terms of being able to accomplish something. Does that factor somewhere in your model?
It does. Absolutely. It does. And we're going to get to that. But here's, sorry, I have to cough. I tried to mute and then I didn't. Sorry, I thought that I'd muted. Okay. Yes, the thing to keep in mind there is that adoption, I've never even put this together. Oh my gosh, this is so clear. Like adoption is all about belonging in the family sense, but also in the technology sense. So if you go back to thinking about the binaries of humans versus tech, we approach humans with a tech binary and say, if you do this and this, you'll have this accurate thing that happens. And so then, your life is good. That's not how humans work. We have to stop thinking about this as an informational transactional process and start thinking about this as core belonging of humans. Until we do that, adoption won't work. Also, adoption takes a really long time. And the last thing is adoption's an outcome. You can't do adoption directly. Adoption is what happens when a bunch of systems work together, or they don't, and you don't have adoption. But I will absolutely address how you can approach implementation so that you have an outcome that is more likely to have favorable adoption. And friction, I love that you use the word friction. Friction's not actually a problem. And maybe I should say it this way. Friction is a known constraint. And so the goal is not to get rid of friction. The goal is actually to deal with it in a human way. And I think like otherwise all you're trying to do is solve friction with automation. You cannot solve a lot of like core human behavior problems with automations. And when you try, you actually just create high amounts of institutional knowledge and dependency on a single person that either gets hit by a bus or wins the lottery, but eventually moves on. And that, by the way, is also related to the human binaries. So, okay. All right. I love that question. Does anybody else want to write? I would love to see if you want to write them down. Other data points that would happen in a CRM implementation. Like I've done hundreds of CRM implementations, so I can draw that map, but I'm curious what other people think is on it. And I'm not going to we're not going to dive into that. Oh my gosh, we're already halfway out of time. Oh, I've got so much more to talk about. Okay. When users complain, they're not telling you about their system. They're telling you about their state of belonging. Humans communicate in binaries around belonging or not belonging. If you go to get technical requirements, what you think you're doing maybe is getting true false statements about the tech stack. But what you're actually hearing is humans giving you answers around their sense of belonging or not, which means if their boss is in the room, they will give you completely different answers, right? Because they don't, they'll say the system doesn't work. Well, I've got this whole thing. We'll just walk through. Okay, what users say and what they actually mean, or what you can interpret them meaning. It won't do X, Y, Z. And what they mean is it won't do what I thought it would do, right? The system doesn't work, which means it doesn't do what I expect. Or it means it doesn't do something if I don't log in and I forgot my password. It says the system is wrong. And what they mean is I don't understand this report. Like a digital system, like digital tools are calculators. That's all they are. They're just big calculators. It's not wrong, and it does work almost all the time. In 11 years and as a Salesforce MVP, I found one bug. That's it. The math worked every other time. It was all human error besides that. It takes too long almost always means it will take me too long to learn it. So they'll introduce a shortcut that will absolutely increase the amount of time that everything takes after that. The big one is it should. Anytime you hear the word should around systems, like you are already off track. Like it should what, there's no such thing as intuition for digital systems. They are the least intuitive things around. That is a uniquely human trait. That's the part of the system that the humans bring, and it's part of the insight. We're gonna have to think about some things, and computers can't figure them out. So, okay. So this brings, I'm not going to dive into it, but I have a whole world of question around how we gather requirements and whether they are getting at what we think they're getting at. So, okay. All right. Next thing is, so that's emotions, expectations, experiences. And the question is, okay, what happens now when we take that knowledge on how humans are and we start thinking about what it looks like to implement technology with them? And the first concept I came across that really changed my mind around a lot of this is change saturation. And change saturation is just when disruption exceeds capacity. So if you think about, can you all hear my dog barking? I don't know. I think all right, hold on. I'm going to go yell at somebody.
It's not a big deal. It's just a little bit, Tim. Not
It's
to
not a
worry.
big deal. Yeah. We
Yeah.
all have that.
Yes. It's all good. You
All
can
right.
leave.
Yeah, no, good. All right. I'm not actually yelling at people. I was just, it'd actually be good if the door is closed. Okay. If you think about capacity for change as a coffee cup and you think about disruption as coffee, right? There's only so much coffee that can fit in a cup. If you think about your organization's ability to handle disruption or handle change, and then you think about the amount of disruption going on in your organization, there's a finite amount of capacity that any organization has to handle disruption. And what happens after you reach that disruption level is that it pours over the side and it does not stick around. It doesn't stay. So one of the most important limits And implementations is not governor limits. It is not, I'm suddenly blanking on, what is it, cloud coverage or code coverage. It is not that. What we need to start looking at is how much capacity does this organization have for change? And a lot of them, especially because I worked with nonprofits, a lot of them don't have a lot of capacity for change. And the disruption that you're introducing may also be, competing with disruption from someone being out on maternity leave or a great resignation or a pandemic, right? Disruption's disruption, whether it's intentional, it's strategic or not, it's just the amount of things getting thrown at an organization relative to its ability to change. If you are a consultant working with an organization, it is already out of capacity for change, which is why they're talking with you. So if the first thing you do is go pour in new technology, you're actually creating more problems than you're solving. Now, I know for a lot of us, we don't have the choice. Like, we get stuck on projects, whether or not, and we're on projects with people who also didn't get to choose whether they were going to do this or not. But I do want to just say at the outset, one of the issues that we run into is that introducing new technology is creating disruption in and of itself. And if we don't start with the capacity in an organization to handle that disruption, we're going to blow the saturation limits for that organization before we even start doing anything. So I started thinking about this a lot when I was thinking about the waterfall methodology, right? There's basically two methodologies that we use, waterfall and agile. Half the time, agile is just scope creep for waterfall, right? When it's done well, it's great. Like Sharif at Agile Cloud does amazing work with agile. Most of the time, though, it's kind of waterfall with an unending amount of next phases that are not really defined. And, we're all kind of familiar. There's a kickoff, there's discoveries and must-haves. There's user acceptance testing, you find the legacy data, throw it in the system, you say, okay, now it's live, hold everybody up in a room for 2 days, you do all the training, and then, you start the next phase, you find the things you forgot, backfill the data, you start support, and you're on to phase 2, right? This is, I'm of course mostly joking, but this is kind of the way it is, right? Like, non-specifically, but it's something like this. This is kind of the shape of it. And my only point on here is, if we looked at what amount of time is spent configuring the digital systems and we made it yellow, and then we looked at the amount of time that is spent configuring the humans and we made it red, this is what we would see. We would see a lot of yellow and a very little bit of red. And this is probably not to scale. The amount of red is actually probably 1/8 as much, right? This could be a 2,000-hour project and we could spend 16 hours on training, right? Like we see that all the time. Training doesn't work. Like, it just does not work the way that we expect it to. And the reason for that is that we are introducing disruption on top of disruption. We're putting people in a room and we're basically answering true, false process questions for them. We're not providing any sense of belonging related to it. So we're not tapping into those humans' binaries. And humans can only learn about, 10 things in a day. So if you have an 8-hour training and you have 100 things to teach them, yeah, they learned 10 things. And one of them was their password. If it's a 2-day training, then you get 19 things in a password because they forgot their password the next day. It's 18 things in a password. Like, right? Like, we take in and learn much more slowly than we can be trained. And to your point, Ruby, earlier about behavior and understanding are not the same thing. You can know what you're supposed to do and not behave in that way, because it doesn't make sense. Nobody's paying attention most of the time anyway, and all the data is bad. So, like, how important is it? And if you're really feeling overwhelmed, it's very unlikely you're going to turn to a new system that makes you feel more uncomfortable because it's more disruption. So we spend a lot of time thinking of humans as robots that have a a true false binary. They just need to know, is this accurate? Will it do what it's supposed to do? That's just not how humans work. So when we go to implement, this is what I was doing time and time again. We implemented Salesforce for hundreds of nonprofits. And what we found every time is that the executives who signed the contract felt like the implementation was going slow. This is quantity of implementation. This is time, whether this is months, quarters, days, weeks, whatever. The people that were paying for it were frustrated because it was taking so much time. So the board of directors, the executive director, et cetera. Why is this taking so long? But what I also found was that the staff who were doing it felt like it was going way too fast. So Chris in accounting was like, I already have 40 hours a week, and now I'm pulled into, review calls and data testing and all of this, and I just can't keep up. And when I started mapping, okay, what does disruption look like if we start by introducing new technology, gather requirements, throw a bunch of work on, and the assumption is that in the long run, this disruption will go down and everybody will be better off. And I saw that happen a lot of times. And we certainly set up systems where that could happen. But what we found was that the emotional context, the emotions carried over. And if we introduced resentment, which is a negative emotion, if the experience people had was worse than they expected, it would create negative emotions like resentment, like fear. And those things would absolutely not cause the disruption to go down. Instead, it would go high and plateau. This is what a failed implementation looks like. It is an emotional issue where people don't use a system either because they're mad at it, they're resentful of it, they're afraid of it, or it just doesn't do what they needed it to do in the first place. Like we create these kinds of systems in the process that we approach. What happens when we have systems with high disruption in them? The experience is worse than their emotions, it creates negative emotions. Those negative emotions create future negative expectations. So now you're forecasting that this will be bad into the future. Then those expectations are met because tech always sucks at first. And then those negative emotions compound. They start spreading around the water cooler. And politically, I've seen systems that needed to be replaced, even though they were fine. They needed to be replaced because it was a political decision to preserve leadership capital. And it wasn't the wrong decision. It's just that these systems are not just binaries around true-false statements. There's a lot of other human factors that are involved. How humans respond to sustained disruption, it makes it feel out of control, so they say the system doesn't work. They turn to tools that they know, like Excel, right? If you are feeling like I traveled one time for 3 weeks overseas. I love traveling, and I love traveling overseas. It was great, but by the last few days, I ate at McDonald's every meal just because I wanted something that I'm familiar with. I also have, the palate of a 12-year-old, so that helps as well. But my point is that we turn to things that are familiar and comfortable when we feel like things are out of control. And as soon as you step out of the system and start running information outside of the system, right? You're not going to import that refined information back in, which means you now have two data sources. You're going to do that every week. You're going to end up with all of these data silos. That will not translate into information that can be turned into insight. So this right here breaks that final chain of allowing your executives to derive insight from the data. Also, admins leave to become consultants, right? They don't do this because the money pays more. They do this because when the consulting company came in, they belonged. They felt like, I know where I'm not crazy. This is amazing. I love this kind of work. This is the best thing ever. And suddenly all of this invisibility felt different. They found this community. I work with nonprofits all the time. Somebody gets voluntold to work the system. They learn Salesforce to become really good at it. They love it. and they love the organization that they started with, but that organization has no idea what they do. And meanwhile, they've become very good friends with a consulting partner that they worked with, and that consulting partner made them feel like they were part of a herd. That was amazing. And they realized, I need to go someplace where my work is, understood, respected, I'm seen, I'm heard. That is why admins leave. The pay is way better, so there's that as well. But honestly, it's not mostly the pay. It is mostly because they feel out of community. And then the next thing that's happening right now is that consultants are quitting tech. Actually, consultants are quitting companies that are not figuring this out, and where there is a misalignment between what is being sold to a company and what is getting executed on, because consultants are empathetic, they live front line with their clients, and they can see down the tracks that this is not going to land for their clients. And it feels so out of balance or out of alignment with their values that they feel like they need to go someplace where their values are better understood. And they're finally finding the language for that. So if you're a consulting partner, or if you own a consulting firm especially, this is on the horizon for us, and something to be really, really important or paying attention to. Okay, this is why I created something I call guidance. It's a methodology that gets at this. Spent several years developing it and practicing with clients on it. It's not foolproof, but it actually works better because it's built around how do you help Chris in accounting. And the first thing that you do is you move the disruption line below the expectation line. And you do this by starting with them and the way they use technology before you ever implement a new system, right? So you spend time helping them understand how to use a system that they have. This means that you're not pouring coffee into a full capacity organization that already has a lot of disruption. You're actually starting by saying, we don't want to increase the amount of new things you're learning. So we're going to learn how to use technology as a team in your existing system. It's not going to be perfect, which is why you need a new system, but that's where we're going to start. How am I doing on time? I'm still okay? Okay, good, great. So that's the idea behind digital guidance. That's the change that it makes, is that you're able to decrease the amount of disruption. And because of that, you do move back how long it takes to implement, but you accelerate the curve. So you roughly end about the same time because you're able to move more quickly. And all of us in consulting firms know is 4 months before you're even in flow with a client. Doesn't matter what got sold. It takes months before you're actually in meetings, really working well with them. This just pays attention to that and uses that momentum and decreases the amount of disruption. What we're trying to do in guidance is create digital maturity. Digital maturity is just when you move an organization from resistance to resilience. This is not moving individuals in the organizations, and it's not moving the entire organization all at once. It's mostly moving teams one at a time. I'll explain why in a minute, but you're moving groups as a community, from resistance to a place where they feel comfortable, to a place where they're engaged, to a place where they're resilient. Everybody that's become a consultant that I've ever met knows how to use Google, and they don't give up. That is their core skill. They just are resilient. They say, out there, somebody figured this out, and they are putting it out on the interwebs for free. And if I search long enough, I'll find it. And the reason they do that is because it worked so many times that they now have a career based on it. So this is resilience, the ability to know you can get to the end and you don't know how. That is a gift. And once a team knows how to do that, it becomes really amazing. Okay, so the way that I imagine, so that's the next tool. That's how we think about implementing and how we get to digital maturity. The core of the human stack here is, if you imagine technology as the auto industry, and you think, okay, Salesforce is like a car manufacturer, and now it matters, and other consulting partners are like a dealership. Now, what happens is that nonprofits and other organizations come to the dealership and they order their, whatever cloud stack they're going to get, and we configure it and deliver it to them. And I saw this with so many nonprofits. They would then wreck it on the way off the lot because they don't know how to drive. And I wasn't driver's ed. I was a dealership. The core issue here in the industry, and the reason that, the reason that 90% of organizations collect data, less than 40% use that data to make decisions, is because they don't know how to drive, and professional services do not know how to teach how to drive. And we don't offer that. So it's assumed that it's going to be their job to drive. And here's the clincher on it. Our binaries are in, out. Do we belong or not? One of the worst out emotions that there is shame. And when you hit another car, we feel shame immediately. I've done it before. I know what I'm talking about. When you hit other cars, you feel shame. When organizations don't know how to use technology, they will spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to hide the fact that they don't know how to use it, because that shame is so strong. It's not an organizational decision. It is the way that they can hide what they're doing in the language, so that nobody has to admit, like, of course it didn't work. I never logged in. Until you get at the emotions and you start making it safe for people to know how to drive, you are not going to start seeing them adopt technology, because they can't admit that they don't know what they're doing with it. And if we think about the tech stack, I did this all the time. We think about digital transformation. So I would start with the fundraising and then, do marketing. And then maybe we could do some strategy with them. And then we'd move into program management or delivery. And then we would, things were getting off track. So we do change management. And then their admin was on the way out the door. So we try and throw as many automations together as we could, right? This is what passes for digital transformation today. And it's the emperor's new clothes of professional services. Strategy and change management are not doing it because it's on the wrong stack. If we think about the tech stack being the place where you make better cars, and the human stack is a place where you make better drivers, then what digital transformation looks like is that on the tech stack, you do digital upgrading. That's all you can do on the tech stack. It's true, false, is digital upgrading, is just the tech stack. And digital maturity is what you do on the human stack. This is where you make better drivers. And then digital transformation looks like taking tech stack projects and human stack projects, which is why there's a little H here. And sometimes the project is not doing almost anything on the tech stack. It's just doing stuff on the human stack, making better drivers. This needs to be the way that we implement technology, so that we are going up and to the right and making digital transformation both at the human level and at the technology level. And also, I like the way that, you've got technology on one axis and people on the other axis, and that leaves everything in the middle for process. So digital guidance on here, the methodology that we created to do this takes one team that's, running the tech, and it takes them through that process first. It's a process that has a framework behind it. We start with that team, and I was doing this nonprofits with no IT background, and then they would take the development team next, and then the marketing team next, and the program team. It's one team at a time, because each team has their own digital culture and their own digital stack. And if you can create the right kind of technology or the right kind of language and framework for it, suddenly everybody in the organization that's been through this process is talking about it the same way, and you reduced all the shame from not knowing how to do it. All right. Am I out of time? Is that it, Alessia?
You can go on. If anyone needs to drop off, that's fine. We're recording, but
Okay.
I didn't even notice how an hour
I know.
flew by,
I agree
so
too. Yeah. Keep going, please. I agree.
Yeah,
And
it's
we can
great.
record for people who can't
Okay.
say.
Yeah.
Sure. All right. That's great. Okay, then, so that's what we call digital guidance. And really, if anybody needs to hop off, that is not a problem at all. Totally get it. The next tool in the toolbox then was, how does an organization know where they are at in this process? And so I used to spend between 25 and 100 hours sitting down and asking organization, all about requirements gathering and all these other things to find out where they were at. And it was really just to ascertain where they were at on the tech stack, 25 to 100 hours. So I ended up feeling like, if you're running requirements on something, it means it's a mystery. And we need less mystery around this, and we need more standardization. So I took the opening, 40 questions or something, and boiled them down into 6 vital signs of digital competency and health, that 3 of which are tech stack and 3 that are human stack. No, absolutely no problem. Thank you for joining us. And so I'm going to talk through really quickly, but what this has allowed me to do is, in 1 hour, be able to, having never met an organization, in 1 hour, pull up their numbers and say, here's what I think is going on with you, and then tell them why and what's going, what they need to do next. So it's taken what used to be 25 to 100 hours and boiled down to an hour. And I'm getting better information and a better read on where an organization really is, because I'm not asking them a bunch of what seems like, true false binary questions that are actually getting answered in, in-out language, which is what happens with requirements gathering most of the time. The tech stack on this has the 3 are solution fit. This is really, really loose. This is just all of their tech stack is just that one line right there. Where is the solution? Is it too big? Is it too small? On data quality, we're looking at, do you trust the data? And if the data was trustworthy, but they don't trust it, they have a perception that it's not high quality, then it is functionally low quality data. Doesn't matter if it actually is or not. Because the perception is what drives people to use it or not use it. It does. Obviously it matters that the data is more quality, right? But perception is really critical in that. And then utilization is whether people are using it or not. Adoption is a big emotional mess around that. Utilization is very easy to track on most telemetry for most systems. When was the last time they logged in? If you have a department, and I tracked this when I worked at as a client, I made a dashboard that showed the cost per user per month or per day, and then the amount of times that they were or were not using their system. It was amazing how that followed departmental lines. Okay, so that's the tech stack. On the human stack, there's system sustainability, digital strategy, and accountability. System sustainability is your system getting a little bit better or worse over time? Digital strategy is, do you know where you're headed as an organization with digital over the next, 3 months, 12 months, 18 months? How far out do you go? Accountability, overwhelmingly, accountability is the most critical factor on the human stack, maybe even on the tech stack. When we think about accountability, we think oftentimes about it being a policing state. Did you do what you're supposed to do? If not, you get punished. Actually, there are 3 forms of accountability. That's the middle form, kind of the punitive form. The other forms, on the worst end of things, is ignoring. Accountability where nobody's paying attention is by far the worst form of accountability. At the highest end, there is recognition. So organizations that have high recognition-based accountability are noticing when people do what they're supposed to do and recognizing that. They also notice people aren't doing that, but what they're finding overwhelmingly is that humans respond to positive reinforcement. So if you are in an accountability structure and culture that rewards you for doing things you're supposed to do, you'll do more of those things. There is not the same level of behavior change around if they're punishing you if you're not doing what you're supposed to do, and If you're ignoring people, they quit and go someplace else. Okay, so those are the 6 vital signs. What I do is aggregate those into a score and then just give a very high level, like, composite score. So like you're high or high. This was an organization I did run this on, and I was really intrigued because they were so high on both stacks. I was like, why are we even talking here? When I looked at this. When I looked at the specifics of their answers relative to the departments, some clarity started to emerge. So, you can see the way that we do this is we look at this per department. If it's just a few people, so I've done this with 5 people, it's just been each person. I've done this with 1 person, and the results are better, obviously, if you have more data, but they actually are revealing at almost any number. So what you can see here is the absolute lowest is executives on digital strategy, and that's really important. We'll come back to that in a minute. You can also see that the executives in general rated everything lower than almost everybody else, significantly lower on the human stack side. So that's really important to note and look at. Then we put these into a spectrum. So right sized or wrong sized on solution fit, accurate, inaccurate on data quality, etc. And we can take a look at them this way. With this kind of an organization, again, nothing's in the red. Like none of these are in the red, which is most of the time we're working with organizations where stuff's in the red. This is where it started to become a lot more clear. There's a high amount of spread here, especially on strategy. So what I ended up telling this organization was, look, you're like an organization that is doing a puzzle together, and you've done the outline pieces because they're straight, and you've flipped all of them over, and you've put them in, color groups, and you've counted all the pieces, but you lost the box and you don't know what you're supposed to be doing. And because of that, you're unable to coordinate efforts. You start working on the red pieces. Somebody says, what about the green pieces? You work on the green pieces. Somebody says, what about the blue pieces? You're the people most in charge of your digital strategy, which is where that picture comes from, are the people that have the least amount of confidence in their digital strategy, which means that everybody else should have at least as low, if not lower, than these people. So that, it was interesting to talk about the organization that way. I was like, do not change your systems. Like, your systems are not the problem. So I run this on organizations. I'm still kind of getting it up and running. And then the last thing I'll talk about is the guidance methodology rests on 4 kind of a framework of 4 things. They all have R words. Forgive me, that's a very boomer thing, I know, but there's the rhythm, there's roles, there's a roadmap, and there's results. If you work on these 4 areas with an organization, you can see measurable change within 4 months with an existing system and with an existing team. As long as, and here's the 2 caveats, as long as that team has a culture of authenticity and transparency, and as long as the systems are cloud-based and collaborative. If you do, then you can see measurable change within 4 months. And that is the kinds of claims that professional service organizations should be making to clients around digital transformation. We can guarantee measurable change within 4 months, because otherwise it turns into, you know what, we're going to work on change till the money runs out, which is all too often what change management looks like. I think I'm going to call it there. The last thing I would say is, if this is interesting to you, I am just launching the Human Stack. You now know why I'm calling it the Human Stack. I'm training consultants to think this way. I'm training consulting firms to develop professional services to deliver services on the Human Stack. But I'm starting with a course for DBAs and executives that work at organizations that need to do better with tech, but for whom they're not sure that a new CRM is really what they need. And so I have limited availability in a course or a cohort that I'm running in September. If any of you are interested in joining, please reach out to me on LinkedIn, DM me, find out whatever. I'm going to limit the amount of seats on that so that it's not too many people. I will also, though, be making an online course for this that's available, to organizations and nonprofits. That should be done by the end of the year. I've seen this be really transformative for organizations, and especially for technologists who just need to understand, why is this so hard? What is all this craziness that is in here that we never talk about? This is my stab at getting at some of those questions. All right. Thank you very much for listening for so long.
Oh, this is really great.
This
So
is
many things that
excellent.
I had never thought about. Yeah, amazing.